Hello, everyone. So thank you for tuning in to the Food Hub's volunteer training online webinar sessions. So thanks to everyone for who has decided to join us and volunteer with the organization. So we're definitely excited to have you as part of our team. So first, we'll just introduce ourselves. So my name is Haileigh. I know I'm showing up as Alicia Lake in the corner there. That is not the case. We just have one account to do this on. So I am a dietitian. I'm working with a few projects on the Food Hub, and I've also done a previous internship with the Food Hub and participated in a lot of the volunteer training and orientations previously. Mark?
Hi, my name is Mark. I'm the volunteer coordinator this year at the Food Hub, and I was also here last year. I am so far going into my third year of my Bachelor of Business Administration degree at CPU.
Great. So we assume that many of you probably know what the Food Hub is and what we do. We just wanted to give you a brief explanation as to some of this stuff, just so that way you kind of know who we are. So we're an online marketplace for local food, and we operate as a nonprofit multi-stakeholder co-op. So that means we have membership from consumers, producers, and restaurants. So we make it really easy for local consumers to be connected with producers here in Cape Breton, and we allow each week consumers to go online and order selected foods that we have posted and are able to get this distributed to them. And we definitely couldn't do any of it without our volunteers. So the volunteers definitely make the whole operation go around. So we'll give you a brief outline of what we're going to just be talking about in this training session. So we'll talk a little bit about the volunteer role, any volunteer safety considerations that you might need to be aware of while you're volunteering. We do a lot with food safety and quality control, so we'll touch on some of the basics and some of the details on what you need to know there. And then Mark is also going to go into shift details and tasks. So what is volunteering at our sites actually going to look like? And then we do have some questions integrated throughout the presentation, just to kind of review some of the material that we have talked about. And also just be aware that you will have most of this information on site, and you always will be volunteering with a more experienced volunteer that will be able to help you navigate any issues or any questions that you have whenever you're volunteering. So in terms of your volunteer role, so the volunteers, you really are the main ambassadors for the Food Hub. So you work at the distribution sites in your location that we have. And so you really are creating a welcoming and fun environment for any of the additional volunteers that you'll be working with, and for any interactions you have with any of our delivery truck drivers or any consumers, things like that. And food safety and quality is also a major role with our volunteers. So while you're packing and unpacking orders, always keeping these issues in mind, as well as helping your other fellow volunteers and always having fun. We know that you're volunteering, so we want to make this as much of an enjoyable experience for you as we possibly can. So for volunteer safety, so there isn't too much that you need to know, but we'll just talk about some of the things that could come up. So broken glass, we do have some products that are in jars that could break on occasion during the transportation process. So if this ends up being the case, we just want you to throw away all the glass and dispose of it properly. If it's dropped on the floor, always remember just to use a broom to sweep it up and not to touch it. And notify anybody else you're working with that there is broken glass, so everyone can be aware. And disposing that in a plastic bag so that way no one else comes into contact with it. And then if you suspect also that maybe you have received a box and there is broken glass inside of it, and you can kind of hear it. So a lot of our food comes in boxes, as you can see in the picture there, in the cardboard box. So if you shake the box a little bit and you can hear the glass within it, just do not open the box. We don't want you to cut yourself to try and make sure that we can save, whatever might be inside the box. It's just not worth it. So throw away the entire box. We don't want you to risk any injury in doing so, and we will deal with any of the product losses at a later time. And then, so in terms of lifting, so because we do receive our food in these boxes, if there's anything that might be a little bit heavier, and you're kind of questioning, if this is too heavy for you, what you can do. So the picture at the bottom there that kind of just shows the proper way to lift, these will be available to you on site, so that way you can refer to it while you're volunteering. So always just make sure to use teamwork. So have two people lifting the object, always lifting with your legs and not your back. And then if there's any safe equipment to use that's available on site, please use that as well. And then last, so if there's anything outside of your comfort level, or if there's any situation where you feel uncomfortable, we always just want to make sure that you are willing and able to contact us over any situation. So we rely on our volunteers and appreciate all that you do, and want to make sure that you're comfortable when you're showing up for your shift. So we will always find a way to make arrangements for you. So for COVID-19, so this is something that I'm sure everyone has had to adjust to in their own way. So in terms of what we have been doing, so we've developed our plan for making sure we're following public health guidelines with a local public health officer to ensure that we're keeping both of our consumers and our volunteers safe during this time. So we've moved to a contactless pickup system. So typically our volunteers unpack food delivered by our trucks in boxes and then arrange it out on tables for consumers to pick up themselves. But because of COVID, we're trying to minimize the amount of people that are touching the food, but also coming into the space. So our volunteers are now packing orders by kind of looking at consumer order forms and invoices, and then placing these into each individual household separate bags for people to then pick up or have delivered, and things like that. So as well as masking and social distancing, I would say the next things, these kind of go hand in hand together. So we're asking that if you cannot keep a minimum of the 6 feet social distance between other volunteers, delivery truck drivers, consumers, anyone that might be around the site, that you please wear a mask while you volunteer. And if you don't have one, we will have these provided for you on site if you've shown up and you might have forgotten your mask. And then obviously if you have any questions or concerns, definitely just reach out, send us a message. And then always, even if you are wearing a mask, just practicing that social distancing is always something that we're encouraging. So, and then with travel, so if you have been out of the maritime provinces and you were required to do a 14-day self-isolation, and maybe you had a shift that was scheduled, please just reach out to us. We want you to be able to complete your 14-day self-isolation. So we will find another way to get your shift covered. So please do not show up to your volunteer shift if you have been out of the province. And then that kind of also goes to the next one, which would be, illness or anything like that. So if you're feeling unwell at all, so, don't show up if you have any of the symptoms of COVID-19, but also just generally unwell, so we can all practice, good management of decreasing the risk for COVID-19. So if you are looking for any of these, if you're questioning it, just send us a message. Nova Scotia Health Authority has lots of resources for what to look for if you're feeling unwell. And then hand hygiene. So we always encourage this anyways, because we are dealing with food products. So this includes both washing your hands and sanitizing. So we will have sanitizer available for everyone on site, as well as wipes that you can use to wipe down your surfaces and do any cleaning that you would need to do. So we're asking that when you come to your shift to please wash your hands, sanitize, and then also in between packing each order. So if you're volunteering and you're working with one person's order and then you move on to the next one, we just ask between each one if you could just sanitize your hands, that would be great. So then the next thing would be the volunteer binder. So this is where you'll have a lot of the information that we're going to talk about in this presentation. So some of the things I already mentioned will be available to you here. So this is where you're going to find orientation guidelines, any checklist that you need in terms of food safety, shift task, the veggie guide. So the veggie guide is basically, sometimes we have foods that not everybody is totally familiar with. So if you are trying to decide between, for example, is this spinach or is this kale, then what you can do is you can look at the veggie guide, and that will help show you how to differentiate between certain vegetables that you might not be familiar with. So that will help you when you're organizing some of the products that come in from delivery, as well as temperature charts. So this is where you're going to record temperatures at the site for our food storage, and Mark will touch on that later. And then quality control and food safety guides. So this will be the information that we'll talk about in terms of food safety. And then we also have a page that we call the notes for office. So I'll explain what that is in the next slide. So this is kind of what it looks like in the picture here. So we're just going to talk about this now because it will come up throughout the rest of the presentation. So just so that way you're familiar with what we're referring to. So this is where you'll document any events that happen during the shift. So this could include any missing food items, if there was any errors made, food safety and quality issues, and if someone, didn't pick up an order or left something behind. And then when you're writing these issues, also with packaging, labeling, things like that, you also want to make sure that you're including the name of the consumer that it's affected and the name of the producer whose product might have been affected, as well as we'd also like it if you could initial it yourself. So that way we know if we need any more information, we can just contact you and get maybe a little more information on the issue. And then this is also a space where you can write any supplies that are needed on site. So if you're noticing, okay, we're low on bags, we're low on sanitizer, then you can just write that at the top and let us know, and we'll be able to supply that for you. So basically at the end of the shift, you just make sure that a picture gets taken of this sheet and then it's sent to our office before you leave. So that way we know what information we need. So then we'll move on to some of the food safety basics. So as you know, we're the last stop before food orders get to our consumers. So this makes it really important for us to be really diligent with food safety and quality, to detect anything that we might have missed and the other steps of transport or production. So some of the key aspects that you'll need to be aware of are making sure that you're washing your hands before handling products when you get there in between each order, just like I had mentioned. So, and then also ensuring that all the surfaces are sanitized that might be coming in contact with food. And then at each location, we also have cold storage, so fridge and freezers for the food to go in. So making sure that these are monitored and always functioning properly. And we also have some higher risk foods that we do sell, so such as meat, poultry, seafood. So these foods come in frozen. We want to make sure that they don't get thawed and that they're also leaving us frozen. So, and then also making sure any packaging, debris, contamination in any of our food products, that we're monitoring for that and making sure that we're minimizing those errors as much as possible. So we talk about food safety and food quality. So what exactly is the difference between these? So food quality is more about, I would say the more overall appearance and sensory aspects, and what is safe to consume, then what is safe to consume. And then food safety is more of a concern because there's a little bit more of a cause for illness. So we want to prevent the food safety as much as possible. So food safety is more of a concern if it's safe for people to eat without getting sick. And then food quality is more about its overall aesthetic and appearance. And so we'll give you some examples of this. So essentially, food quality can make people angry. Food safety can make people sick. So food quality, so here's some examples. So if you saw something that was, maybe you had an apple that was slightly bruised, that could be an example of food quality. It doesn't mean it's unsafe to eat, it's just the quality has been diminished. Any freezer burns, any pest damage to leaves, so if you have holes in lettuce or things like that, discoloration, like some wilting of leaves, or any bread that's dry or hardened. Doesn't mean that these things are unsafe to eat. It's just that their quality has gone down slightly. And you'll be able to check these things off in the volunteer binder, and other volunteers will help you to be able to differentiate between the food safety and food quality. So then food safety, so this is the examples of things we definitely would not want to see. We would not want them to go out to our consumers. Would be food that has any foul odor, so if it's not smelling like it should, any meat that's been soft or warmed, as well as seafood, any molding on any of our vegetables or products, any contamination from meat products. So if meat products have leaked onto any of our vegetables or other products, that would be an issue. And leaking, which is leaking in broken packaging, as well as broken glass, wood, or metal. So any of those physical contaminants that can get into our food. So here's an example here. So food quality versus food safety. So we have a picture on the left that looks like there's some discoloration, wilting, things like that. And then the picture on the right has a lot of holes in it. So essentially the answer to this question, so the one on the left, so we would identify that as being both. So they've got wilted leaves, a rotten appearance, and there's significant discoloration. And by the looks of it, there's probably been some leakage or things like that. Like those are completely going bad, and we would not want that to go to any of our consumers. So if you ever identified something like that, we would ask that you do not pack it away. And then the one on the right, so this is essentially just food quality. As you can see, the leaves, they're not wilted. They still have a nice green color. They just have some holes from pest damage, which is common in some of our vegetables, which is why we have little stickers that have like little ladybugs and bugs on them for you to see at the volunteer site. So that way that just lets our consumers know that there's nothing wrong with the product. It's just it's been grown in a field where there might not have been use of pesticides or anything like that, which is a common issue, especially on some organic farms. So the next one, so food quality versus food safety. So here we have two issues again. So the one on the left with the freezer burnt meat, so that's a food quality issue. So there's no safety concerns here. It is safe to eat. It's a little bit freezer burnt, so that will affect the taste. But overall, that's fine. Then on the right, so this one, it could be hard to see from the image there, but this one is a food safety issue because it's in an overall plastic bag, but the bag it's initially been in, as you can see there, the top piece of meat has been exposed, so the bag has been slit open. So we don't want to see any of this, so that means that the meat could have been exposed to any potential hazards. And we can't always eliminate all bacteria when it's cooked, so we don't know at what point of the transportation that this could have happened at. So we don't know what cut the bag or what it might have touched since then, so it's not good to risk it. And then for this one, so this one, the eggs on the left, so kind of a trick question, I suppose. So this is essentially both. So if you're only referring to the cracked egg, that would be a food safety issue because you wouldn't want anyone to be cooking an egg that's already been opened and exposed. But the rest of the eggs are perfectly fine. So if you did have a carton of eggs where one of them is cracked, you could remove that egg and discard it. But then the other eggs are safe to eat. So you could still give the consumer those eggs. And then for the picture of the zucchini, so this is a food safety issue because we can clearly see that there's some mold growing, some bacteria, and that would definitely be something that would make someone sick. So we would not want to see that. So then I will also just hand it over to Mark to talk about the shifts a little bit, but before I do, also just mention, I know I talked a little bit about frozen items, but we also do have items that need to be refrigerated. So a lot of the main concern we do have is with our items that go in the freezer, but it's also important that when an item does indicate that it should go in the fridge, that we still make sure we're doing that, because we have products like eggs and fermented goods that we still wouldn't want to be sitting out for very long, especially given some of the heat that we've had this summer. It's not ideal to have those products not going into cold storage right away. So Mark, if you want to take it away.
Okay, great, thanks Haileigh. So now we're going to transition into the shifts. So at the Food Hub, we have two main shifts, and that is the early shift and the late shift. So the early shift would be primarily responsible for any cleanups or preparations before the truck comes, and taking inventory and beginning the packaging process. And the late shift would be mainly responsible for finishing the packaging process, greeting consumers, and cleaning up after the shift. So now we will get into the scheduling. So the whole scheduling process begins with a monthly volunteer availability form that will be distributed prior to the beginning of the month via email. So filling out the availability form will allow you to sort of customize your availability, indicate what days you are available, as well as your preference of shift. So once you have filled it out, the schedule can be made, and once the schedule has been made, we can distribute it out to you, and you will get a schedule based off of your location, which will also let you know what shifts you're volunteering and on what days, and also who you will be volunteering with. So there are also, in this process, there are also weekly reminders that go out every Wednesday to let you know that you are volunteering, just so you don't forget, because it might happen where, it happens to the best of us, where you might forget that you have an obligation. So just getting that reminder I find really helpful. Okay, so now we're going to get into the early shift. So as I said, the early shift is mainly responsible for preparing and setting up for the delivery, receiving the delivery, and counting inventory, and cleaning up and doing food safety checks. Okay, so now it would be the delivery. So the first step of the early shift would be the delivery, or preparing anything before the truck comes. So setting up the tables with the producer signs is very important, because when you receive all the boxes from the truck, all the food that comes will be in cardboard boxes with labels on them that will say a producer name. So if you have producer signs on the table, and we have lots of producer signs on site, if you designate which producers have their products on which table, it's great for organization. And also, if you ever miss a step, or you feel like you're missing a step on the early shift, there is a full early shift checklist included within the volunteer binder. And so, so keeping the path clear for the deliveries is also an important thing to do, because all the cardboard boxes will be coming in, and there's likely going to be a lot of them. So keeping that path clear for the delivery drivers is very important to do, just to minimize any hazards. Okay, so now the next thing you'll want to do when you're on your early shift is do temperature checks. And temperature checks are also quite important when we're monitoring our cold storage. So ideally, we have some recommended temperatures on the right of the slide here. So you'll be recording these three things: so the refrigerators, the delivery trucks, and the freezers. So the ideal temperature for the fridge would be somewhere from around 4 degrees, or in around 4 degrees Celsius. The delivery truck would be 0 degrees to around 4 degrees. Usually they'll always tell you that it's around 0, or they might also tell you that it's 32, which is just 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but in Celsius it will be 0. And also the freezer, which should be at levels between -18 and 23 degrees Celsius. So when you record these temperatures down, there's a chart in the volunteer binder that you will be recording. So you just, write in, which would be freezer, the date, and the temperature that it's at. And when you do record the temperatures, like each unit will have a thermometer inside of it so that you can read it easily and get an accurate measurement. So next is the delivery of the boxes, which I've already touched on in a tiny detail. So the boxes, as I said, will have the food in them, and the food will also come in like a bunch of cardboard boxes. So each cardboard box will have a Food Hub label on it. And as you can see on the right of your screen here, this is what the label looks like. And so the first thing you want to do when checking the label on the boxes is making sure that we have the right location. We would really like to avoid having, say, a box that ended up in, or supposed to go to the deck, maybe it ended up in Ingonish. So just checking that and making sure that there's no issues with locations, because it has happened a few times before. So yeah, it's a good habit to get into, to start checking the locations first. And also another great thing to take note of is where it's stored. And so on the bottom of the label, you will see the little frozen and refrigerated boxes on the bottom. And if each, let's say if frozen is checked off there, that would mean that that box belongs in the freezer. Or if refrigerated is checked off, that means the box will belong in the refrigerator. So getting that into cold storage as soon as possible upon noticing that is critical. Also, the number of boxes. So as you can see, again, on the label there, it would say box 1 of 2. And so if it says 1 of 2, then you'll know that you're supposed to receive 2 boxes from this certain producer. So if you are, if you have a feeling you're missing boxes, going around and checking how many you actually received and how many you're supposed to receive is a good way to just minimize errors and trying to catch them sooner. So next would be the inventory check. So this is once everything has been unpacked. So this is what the inventory sheet on site will look like, just to your right on the slide there. So when counting inventory, it's pretty simple. You just make sure that each product on the list from each producer has arrived and in the correct quantity. So you'll see it's broken down into columns. So the column that's whited out there would have a producer name on it, and then the region that it comes from, the product, which might be, it says on there like green onions or snow peas, the description, which we will get into just in a little bit, where it is stored. Now on the inventory sheet, that would say, that column that you see that's blank there, that says stored, it would usually say fridge or freezer. So just letting you know where that item should be kept. And also the quantity. So the quantity is basically the amount of that certain item from that certain producer you are supposed to be receiving. And if anything is missing, then you will write it down in the notes for office, and also just make a note of it on that inventory sheet. So let's say if you received all, like if say, let's take that arugula at the top of the page, for example. If you received 10 arugula, then that's great. All you have to do is just check it off. But say if you receive maybe 4 of the basil when you're supposed to receive 5, then it's good practice to just write the number 4 right beside the name of the product. Okay, so next would be unpacking. So When unpacking the boxes, just place each product by the sign of their producer, which I already got into. Once you have unpacked everything, then you can check off the master inventory list. Um, so as I said, like if the quantities don't match, then you just write the number, or if the quantities do match, then you just write a check mark. Um, what we've been doing recently that we found really helpful is that sometimes there will be a lot of similar products. For example, actually on the inventory sheet, you have a good example of it there. There's two types of kale. One is blue curled kale and one is red Russian kale. So what we like to do now is we put labels right next to them so we can differentiate when we're packing. That really helps to minimize errors, and it also helps if you get confused maybe sometimes when two products look really similar. And it also happens when there's unit labeling differences, but we'll get into that later. So yeah, going through when you're unpacking, monitoring for food safety and quality control is another step, and you would also write those issues down in the notes for office. Okay, so on to unclear unit labeling. So this is a problem that occurs quite often when we're volunteering, and it's definitely one thing that causes a lot of confusion. So if you direct your attention to the bottom right of the screen, there will be an example invoice, and on that invoice, you will see two different types of cucumbers, both from the same producer. So this caused a few issues probably about a month ago at our Sydney location. Two different types of cucumbers came in, and it was kind of a mess trying to figure out which one was which, because one type of cucumber was in a bag, while one type of cucumber was just, well, one individual cucumber. So it ended up causing a lot of confusion to the point where people who would have ordered a bag of cucumbers only got one individual cucumber, or people who ordered one individual cucumber got a bag of, say, four. So that definitely tripped a lot of us up, and just paying attention to that unit side of the invoice is really, really crucial, especially when you have such similar products from the same producer. Okay, so now we will get into unpacking the freezer. So when unpacking the frozen items, it is always best to have at least two volunteers putting the items in the freezers and counting how many items were received. So we do not want frozen items to thaw out, because if they do thaw out too much, then they will no longer be safe. So getting those products into cold storage as soon as possible is crucial. So when packing orders from the freezer, it's a pretty simple process. You would just grab the item out of a designated freezer, put it in a bag, and write the consumer's name on it, and then place it in a designated cooler with an ice pack so that it stays cool and doesn't thaw out. That is a very important part, because sometimes, let's say if you're waiting for delivery drivers, it could be a long wait, and we don't want any disorganization to happen if we keep items in the freezer. So instead, we like to keep items in coolers, in designated coolers, so that we do not lose track of it, and also it doesn't take up space in our freezers that we're currently using and cause a bunch of confusion. Okay, so next would be the packing of the consumer orders. Now, this is something you would start on the early shift, or at least that's what we do in Sydney. So packing consumer orders is a job that comes with a lot of steps. So basically, you will be going through consumers' invoices and placing the items that the consumer has ordered into a bag or a box. So make sure to pay attention to any issues that may arise during packing, such as quality issues, food safety issues, missing products, etc. And after you are finished packing one order, staple the invoice to the outside of the bag. And if you have more than one bag, then just write the consumer's name on the outside of the other bag. And after you're done that, place that bag onto, or those bags onto a designated trolley or a table, depending on your location. So once you're done, definitely wash your hands because that's an important part of the food safety sort of guidelines we have to follow, especially now since we're dealing with COVID-19. So washing your hands before you pack every order is very important to help limit the spreading of germs. So as you can see from this example invoice that's at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that some things are blacked out underneath the order detail. So what we do at the Food Hub is that once we receive all the invoices, we would go through them and redact any items that are irrelevant to people who are packing. So that would mean items with 0 quantities, and that would also mean memberships, because memberships are basically something that is purchased online. It wouldn't show up. You don't get like a confirmation card. It's just purely online. And also zeros is basically when an item sells out and you haven't confirmed your order, so that it would just show up as a zero to let that consumer know. But that has caused a lot of confusion in the past. People would pack items with zeros, and it would just be very confusing and cause a lot of mistakes. So we'd like to redact those. Okay, so next would be the shift change. So that would be the difference between the early shift and the late shift. So when you're coming in for the late shift, it is important to review any notes for office that are there. And also when you're leaving the early shift for the early shift volunteers, it is very important to tell the late shift volunteers of any missing products, quality and safety issues, confusing packaging, or any products that are marked for specific consumers. Okay, so the late shift. So the volunteers who are working in the late shift are primarily responsible for preparing consumer orders for delivery or pickup, greeting consumers as well, and cleaning up after each shift, as well as the things that you see on the right there, which is the food safety quality control, right, documenting issues and cleaning up. So then we get on to the roles of the late shift. So we have 2 main roles that we play on the late shift, and those would be, the first one would be packer. So packers are the people who prepare and package the consumer's orders. Packing is done in order of priority based on which routes are leaving first or which consumers are picking up first. This will ultimately differ based on your location because, for instance, Sydney has a lot of delivery drivers and a lot of different routes, so it would be in a different order than, say, Ingonish, a location that does not have delivery. So ultimately, it will depend on your location. The order for Ingonish packing is kind of arbitrary, I guess, but Sydney, it would follow a distinct order. So helping fellow volunteers with any questions or concerns that they may have or issues that they may run into is a very important part of being a packer, because it helps minimize a lot of errors and helps other volunteers further their knowledge. Communicating is very, very key. So if you are packing and you have a question, please do not hesitate to ask one of us. We'll definitely be more than happy to help. And I guarantee you that any of our experienced volunteers will tell you that they've seen it all. So no issue that you may run into on the day-to-day would surprise them, and chances are they've run into it themselves before and they would know how to fix it. So the next role is a greeter. So greeters are responsible for ensuring that our current process remains contactless. So the greeter is responsible for setting up any tables or trolleys or any other spaces and designating them for certain routes or pickups when orders are packed and finished. So another thing about the greeter is that if, for instance, if a driver or consumer is late picking up their orders or order, you are permitted to call that person, call the driver, call the consumer, and try to make an alternate arrangement. So I'm just gonna take a breath here. I know this is a lot of information. You don't need to digest all of it right now because I understand it is a ton. So you will get on-site training as well. So definitely don't worry if you're not absorbing 100% of this because you will always be scheduled with experienced volunteers who are, as I said, they're more than willing and more than happy to help you. All right. So now, before you leave, before you leave for the late shift, if you work in the late shift, make sure all information is recorded in the notes for office. So, as I said, any information like food safety issues, quality issues, missing products, etc., make sure that is all complete and written and recorded in the notes for office. And once you're done with the notes for office, and once you know you're done, take a picture of it or email or text it to Monica McLean, who is our office manager. So, when you're done of taking a picture of the notes for office and sending it on, just make sure to collect any other documents that might be rolling around, like any checklists or any sheets from the volunteer binder or any inventory lists, and put those items all in the volunteer package and take up as little space as possible when you put away stuff. All right, so next we have the cleanup. So basically what we do on the cleanup is that we wipe down our surfaces like countertops, fridges, any like the outside of freezers, like any frequently touched surfaces like handles, throw away boxes and bags from the fridge, take out any trash and deal with recycling. Put away the crates and bags and also make a note if you are low on supplies. And before the last thing we do before we leave is making sure all windows are closed and locked and the doors are locked. So that is it for me. I will pass it back along to Haileigh for the last couple of questions.
All right, so now that Mark has gone through some of the information about what your shifts will look like, we'll just wrap up by going over a few questions. So one of the first ones we have, so when should volunteers wash their hands? So the answer in here is all of the above. So we had mentioned at the start of the presentation that we want you to be showing up to the shift, washing your hands when you get there, and then in between packing consumer orders. And of course, just thinking about general food safety concerns always after handling any meat products. So if you're unpacking the freezer and then you move to go start unpacking some vegetables, we want you to still be sanitizing and washing your hands after doing that. And then in what order should food items be unpacked from the truck delivery? So here we have a couple different scenarios. So we'll go through as a system. So if you want to think about frozen items, vegetables, or bread, so frozen items would be the one that would need to be first. So the answer is A. So definitely do the frozen items first. So always make sure that that gets into cold storage. And then the fermented goods would be an example of something like I mentioned should go in the refrigerator. And then you can do the vegetables. And if you keep vegetables in their box that they come in, like if you don't open the box yet, the box will actually just keep them cold until you can start unpacking them. And then breads and jams, those things don't need to go into cold storage, so always leave those to the last if you can. And then, so if you suspect there is broken glass in a box that was delivered, what should you do? So open the box, take out the glass, and then continue packing, or throw away the entire box and don't open. So the answer here is C. So like we mentioned before, do not open the box. We do not want you to risk hurting yourself just to open a cardboard box. So those are the main things we wanted to talk to you about in this presentation. So those are the kind of the key things that you need to know before volunteering. And like we said, you'll have this information with you on site. And so here's some contact information if you need to get a hold of any of us. So our assistant manager, Iblin, so the email and phone number is located there. And then our volunteer coordinator email is also located here, but if you've been chatting with Mark, you probably might already have access to this email. So thank you everyone for volunteering. Once again, we really appreciate all the work and effort of our volunteers, and we're so excited to have you start to join the Food Hub.